All right, let's get right into it. Back in 2019, India passed something called the Code on Wages. Now, this was a huge deal, a landmark reform that was supposed to untangle decades of really complex labor laws. The big idea? Super simple, right? One country, one wage code. But, and this is a big but, the road to making things simple has turned out to be anything but. And wow, this quote just nails it, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the central problem here. What happens when a law that's designed to make life easier for everyone actually ends up creating this huge, short-term headache? It's a total paradox, and that's exactly what we're going to dig into. So here's the game plan. First, we'll look at what this new code is replacing. Then, we're going to get into the real heart of the matter, this thing called the 50% rule. After that, we'll see how it shakes up your paycheck, why it's got everyone arguing, and then the big question, why is this thing still not even in effect? You know, for the longest time, if you looked at India's wage laws, it was a mess. A total tangled web of old rules, confusing definitions, and weird exceptions. The whole point of the Code on Wages was to take a giant pair of scissors to all of that and just simplify. One single high-voltage cable instead of a bird's nest of wires. So check this out. We're talking about 4 different laws, right? Some of these are ancient, like from 1936. All of them, boom, gone. Replaced by this one single code. But that's not even the biggest deal. Look at the right side. Before, these laws were picky. They only covered certain people, maybe based on how much you earned or where you worked. Now, it's universal. It applies to everyone in both the organized and unorganized sectors. That is a massive shift, bringing millions of workers into the fold for the very first time. Okay, so if this whole reform has an epicenter, a ground zero, this is it. It all comes down to a new definition for one simple word: wages. Now I know, that sounds super technical, maybe even a little boring, but trust me, this one little change is a bombshell. It has the power to completely reshape every single paycheck in India. So the code starts simple. It says, okay, from now on, when we talk about your wages for official stuff like your retirement fund, here's what counts. And it's just 3 things: your basic pay, something called a dearness allowance, which is basically for inflation, and any retaining allowance. That's it. That's the core, the foundation. But then the law goes on to list a whole bunch of stuff that does not count as part of that core wage. And man, this list is long. It's basically all the other things that pad out your paycheck, your house rent allowance, your travel money, overtime, bonuses, even what your company puts into your retirement fund. All of that gets put into a separate bucket called exclusions. Okay, so you've got your core wages in one bucket and all those exclusions in another. Simple enough, right? Well, here comes the twist, the rule that turns everything on its head. The law says that the total value of all those exclusions, all those allowances, cannot be more than 50% of your total pay. That's it. That is the 50% rule, and believe me, it is an absolute game changer. Let's walk through how this actually works, because this is where the magic happens. So picture an old salary structure, right? 100,000 rupees total. Now, companies loved to keep the basic pay really low, say 25,000, and then cram the other 75,000 into all those allowances. That means 75% of your pay was in that exclusions bucket. Well, under the new code, nope, can't do that. It's not compliant. The rule says your exclusions can't be more than 50%, which in this case is 50,000 rupees. So what happens to that extra 25,000 in allowances? The law basically says we're just going to grab that and move it over to the wages side. And just like that, your official wage base is forced to go from 25,000 all the way up to 50,000. So you can see how that one little rule sets off this huge chain reaction, right? It's like a tidal wave hitting payroll departments everywhere. It completely reshuffles the deck for both employees and their employers. So for you, the employee, it's kind of a good news/bad news situation. The good news? Your official wage base is higher, so more money is getting socked away for your retirement and things like your provident fund. That's awesome for your future. The bad news? Because more is getting deducted for that, your monthly take-home pay, well, it's probably going down. And for employers, it's pretty much a double whammy. Not only do their costs go up because they have to contribute more to your retirement fund, but they also have this monumental task of going through every single employee contract and rewriting it to be compliant. So when you have a change this big, this disruptive, you can bet people are going to have some strong opinions. and boy do they. This reform has become deeply, deeply polarized. You've basically got two camps, and they could not be further apart. In one corner, you have the big industry associations. They're saying, hey, we love the idea of simplifying things. This is great for business. But in the same breath, they're also saying, whoa, this new wage rule is going to cost us a fortune. Then, in the other corner, you have the trade unions, and they are not happy. They're basically calling this a pro-corporate move that chips away at rights that workers fought for years. They say they weren't even properly consulted. And nothing shows this clash of worldviews better than what's happening to the role of the labor inspector. You see, for decades, India had what many called the Inspector Raj, this system where inspectors were seen as these feared figures, just out to find problems and slap on fines. The new code tries to flip that script. The inspector is now supposed to be an inspector cum facilitator, a helper, right? Someone who gives advice to help companies comply. But you can guess how the two sides see this. Industry says, finally, a modern approach. The unions say, you're just taking the teeth out of enforcement. Which brings us to the elephant in the room. This law was passed by Parliament all the way back in 2019. So where is it? Why isn't it actually the law of the land yet? I mean, just look at this. Passed in 2019, and here we are, still waiting. That's a huge delay. For reform this important, that's really not normal. Something is holding it up. And the culprit? The main reason for the holdup is India's federal structure. Here's how it works. The subject of labor is on something called the concurrent list. In plain English, that means both the main central government and all the individual state governments have a say. So even though the main law was passed in Delhi, every single state then has to go and write its own set of rules to make it work on the ground. And trying to get everyone on the same page? Well, as you can imagine, that's created a massive logistical traffic jam. So at the end of the day, where does that leave us? The Code on Wages started with this really noble, simple goal. Let's make things easier for everyone. But the journey since 2019 has shown that trying to simplify something so massive is, ironically, an incredibly complex job. And the big question hanging over everything is this: can this landmark reform ever really break through all the political hurdles and the intense opposition to finally deliver what it promised to millions of Indian workers?
This is the brief on India's Code on Wages 2019. Okay, so what's this all about? It's major legislation aiming to standardize minimum wage, boost gender equality, and simplify wage payments across India for greater worker welfare. All right, first, a new uniform definition of wages, mainly basic pay, dearness allowance, that's for inflation, and retaining allowance. Now here's the key bit. If other payments, like house rent, exceed 50% of total pay, that excess is now wages. Why care? It means potentially higher employer contributions to your provident fund, think retirement savings, and gratuity, which is long service pay. So maybe less take home now, but potentially more savings later. Second, a two-tier minimum wage system. The center sets a national floor wage, a baseline. No state can dip below. Then, states fix their own minimums based on skill and location. It aims for a scientific approach, but here's the snag. Critics say some methods, like using consumption units for family needs, are outdated and kind of gender biased. Finally, enforcement shifting. Gone is the strict Inspector Raj style, that really heavy-handed inspection system. Now it's an inspector cum facilitator approach. They're supposed to advise employers and allow time to fix issues before prosecution, unless it's a repeat problem. Good for business ease? Maybe, but unions worry it could weaken compliance. So, the code is a big step for modernizing labor laws, but its real impact? That depends on solid implementation and addressing stakeholder worries.